Hi, I'm comedian Nikki Glaser, and I am so excited to introduce you to Mr. Burgher's Art 101 class about Claude Monet. I don't know anything about Claude Monet, but that is just a temporary situation for me because I'm about to watch the video that I'm introducing, if I remember to watch it later, because I'm recording this before I saw it. So right now, I don't know anything about Claude Monet. I just know that he was like obsessed with ponds and like lily pads, I think that was him. I truly have no information.
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
Thank you very much for that, Nikki, and welcome back, scholars, to another episode of Art 101 with me, Mr. Burgher. I'm a professional artist and master educator attempting to bring you the best in art historical content. As always, if you like this one, give it a like, a share, a subscribe, a comment, and we can be friends, or virtual friends. There you go.
Not a viable option. What next? Open the other door.
Well, friends, the time has finally come. I need to make a video on one of the most influential artists that is out there in the history of humankind. And no, I'm not talking about Nikki Glaser. I'm talking about Claude Monet. So let's dive into that, which is the topic of the art, the life, the times of none other than Claude Monet. Claude Oscar Monet revolutionized the way art is made and looked at. He provides us with one of the lessons that I have always stressed as an educator. Draw what you see, not what you know. His interest in light, nature, and brushwork is very evident in his paintings. In his youth, he was resistant to formal education and was more interested in drawing caricatures of the kids than the actual academic work of school.
That's not a joke! That is a severe behavioral disorder.
In school, he was known as the dandy due to his well-dressed appearance at all times. One of his first drawing teachers was Charles-François d'Aubigny. Now, Monet had very little formal education and went off to create. Meeting and working alongside the other artists in the field was common, and Monet was greatly influenced by Eugene Boldin. And he would say, "I consider Bolton as my master. I owe everything to him, and I attribute my success to him," which I think is a pretty ringing endorsement. He would go on to Paris to paint under Thomas Couture, but ended up attending the Académie Suisse. Around 1860-1861, he was chosen to serve in the French National Service, where he was stationed in Northern Africa. His Aunt Sophie paid for his release from the remaining 5 years of military service, which was maybe somewhat common.
Nah, I don't think so.
He would go back to Paris and study underneath the Swiss painter Charles Glaser. Now, this was a brief academic experience, but it was good for him to develop those skills. But probably more importantly, it was important for him to have an opportunity to meet other artists such as Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Frederic Bazille, Alfred Sisley, and James Whistler. Now, it was Monet's last formal educator that really drove home the idea of Impressionism. Johann John Keene, about whom Monet said, "It was him that I owe the final education of my eye." As Monet was becoming more and more known, he was being confused for the famous Edouard Manet, who believed that Monet had changed his name to take advantage of his notoriety. But when they met, they became very good friends.
Hell, I like you. You can come over to my house and my sister.
At this time in history, the only way to gain true success as a painter was through having one's work selected and displayed at the official French salon. Initially, Monet had quite a bit of success, having 2 paintings accepted into the 1865 and 1866 shows. This led to several important commissioned works and got him credibility with the rich art collectors. As the years progressed, his art would change, and he began to get rejected from the salon year after year.
Well, let me tell you the story of another loser.
In the late 1860s, 1870s, he was on the run from creditors and bill collectors. It was hard for him to make ends meet. In 1867, his girlfriend of 2 years, Camille Donsiquois, gave birth to their son, Jean. Maybe this goes without saying, but this added an additional strain on the finances, but they barely continued to scrape by. When they started to get ahead, it got worse. Like in 1868, when Monet had the honor of having 5 works in an international maritime exhibition show and was awarded the silver medal, but creditors seized his award money and all of the paintings. Despite these hard times, Camille and Claude were married on June 28, 1870. But again, there's good with bad. A month later, the Franco-Prussian War would erupt.
Whose fault is it? Oh, I want to fucking know.
In this war, his good friend Frederick Bazille was killed in battle. He and his family would move back and forth between London, England, France, and Holland. Side note, it was at this time that he would convert a boat into a floating studio. In April of 1874, an exhibition opened up in Paris that featured the works of Monet, Paul Cézanne, Edgar Degas, Camilla Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Frederick Sisley, and others. And in this show, Monet had put on display, for the first time, Impression Sunrise. Art critic Louis Leroy would feature this painting in his critique of the exhibition, but not in a good way. He said that Impression Sunrise was the most fitting title because it was not a sunrise, it was an impression of one, just like Monet is not a painter, but simply doing an impression of one. He would continue to say, wallpaper in its embryonic state is more labored than this seascape. But the name, being called an impressionist, caught on and was soon worn as a badge of honor.
You're on the team? I'm an alternate.
Monet was working on some 100 paintings in London at the same time, and one of those was this work, Impression Sunrise. The work, not only the title, was very recognized at this time as it is now, and propelled Monet to becoming the unofficial leader of the Impressionists. This would help him gain some critical acclaim, social clout, and monetary gains that he needed. Monet and the Impressionists would begin to host these exhibitions annually. The intent was to showcase the work for the public without a jury and without awards. The Impressionists would host 8 shows over the years, with the last taking place on May the 15th, 1886. But several of these would go on without Monet's participation.
Get off your high f***ing horse.
As time would go on, Camilla became very ill and would have an abortion that caused a lot of infection. 2 years later, she would give birth to their second son, Michel, and it was around this time that the financial strains once again reared their head toward the Monet family. They would move in with the family of Ernest Hashid, a wealthy department store owner. They would stay there for over 3 years. Camilla would die on September the 5th, 1879, leaving Claude with the charge of taking care of his 2 young sons. Ernest's wife, Alice, who was caring for her own 6 children, now began to take care of Monet's 2 additional children.
Well, there goes your social life.
Now, it was thought that there was a strong connection between Claude and Alice, even before Camilla had died, because it wasn't long before Monet was becoming intimate with Alice. He chose to move to Poissy, along with Alice and her children, against her husband's wishes. Many individuals might think that an artist needs to live in the city, and what better city to live in at this time than Paris? But Monet hated Paris. He hated the harassment of the snobs in the city. He very much preferred the slower life, painting in his garden with his cigar in hand. Living in the country, Monet was once again able to focus on his work. One of Monet's art dealers, Paul Durand-Ruel, found some good opportunities in selling Monet's work in some new art markets. By exporting them to the United States, Monet was able to get connected with very eager buyers. But Monet hated the idea. He did not like Americans, he did not like his art going to America, and even in his death, he put it in his will that every piece of artwork that he owned would go to the French government so that it would never leave the country.
That'd be terrible, wouldn't it? Terrible.
Now, for Monet to be able to produce this sort of work, traveling to new locations was very important to the content and subject matter of the work. It was not uncommon for him to be traveling to beaches, farmlands, coastal areas, cities, countries, anywhere he could find a new interesting subject matter. In 1883, he and Alice decided to move the kids to the city of Giverny, where they would rent a house that they would eventually buy. Not long after moving there, his good friend Edouard Manet would pass away, and he would act as a pallbearer at his funeral. The loss of this good friend was very, very difficult for him. However, I believe that it inspired him to get to work. In the 1890s, he worked in Giverny and Rouen. During his time in Rouen, he would create some 40 paintings of the city's Gothic cathedral that are iconic to his study of light and the timing of day effects on our world.
Sheila, honey, you gotta come here. You gotta see this.
What is it?
The key for him was to find a consistent spot where he could paint, so he ended up renting a spot to sit in front of a little curiosity shop called Al Caprice, where he would sit outside and work the paintings in order, going back and forth to a hotel and starting over fresh the next day. Again, his process is very well documented. He was up before 6 o'clock each morning and would be at the cathedral painting by 7. He would literally be working on about a dozen paintings in one morning. He preferred to block in the general colors, observe to add some additional details, alternating back and forth between observation and work.
Oh shit!
He would work as long as a half an hour on each one before moving on to the next. This was a painting process that took several days to complete. It is also said that he would go back to the studio and do some minor touch-ups. He would say, "Every single one of my paintings is in need of some kind of revision, and the finishing touches must be done with care, and this will mean much more than a day's work." Side note, he was not an accomplished drawer, but would occasionally sketch the contours or outline in charcoal before beginning to paint. As he worked throughout his life, he would work in bursts. When the mood hit him, the work was non-stop, and he would not allow anything to distract him from his goal of completing that work. And when that work was done, he would go weeks without touching a paintbrush.
That's right.
Like all artists, Monet had works that he was very frustrated with and believed were unsatisfactory. There was a set of works that he was laboring on off and on for about 3 years. Each painting was valued at about $100,000. Friends and critics that had seen these works thought that maybe they were the finest works that he had ever created. There was an upcoming exhibition in Paris that was going to be huge, and everybody thought these would be perfect to go in. But at the last moment, he looked at the artwork with anger about their quality, and with a paintbrush and knife, he destroyed every single one of those works, despite the protest of the witnesses. When Alice's legitimate husband died in 1891, it opened up the door for Claude and Alice to make their relationship official. They were married on July the 16th, 1892. He was getting to the point where he really wanted to settle down at home with his wife, and so they bought some additional land and began the construction of a water lily garden. Claude could now work from home and study color without the hassle of extended travel.
And he worked out at Giverny, where he was frequently.
I heard that Monet, one of the things that he used to try...
Shh, I'm trying to hear what Paul's saying.
Monet and his family began to enjoy some prosperity as they got older, and so a lot of that work of his older age revolves around his work in the garden. The lily ponds, flower beds, Japanese-style footbridge, and walking paths gave him plenty to see and would spark his creative impulses. He even diverted a small river through the pond to help his rare plant collection prosper. As happens, Monet would suffer some health problems as he got a little bit older. He would collapse due to exhaustion in 1901, and his health and eyesight steadily declined until 1912. It was around this time that Alice had passed away, and his friends and family finally convinced him to go see a doctor.
Are you nuts? That could be dangerous.
He had double cataracts, but refused to have the surgery. Many artists had lost their eyesight due to this very risky cataract surgery at that time. Basically, they would take a small wire brush and use that to rough up the cataract, which is kind of like a callus on the eye. They would then take a very sharp knife or scalpel and slice off that rough layer of the eye. A couple years later, his oldest son would pass away, and his wife, Blanche, who was also Alice's daughter, was hired as his maid and confidant. The work of being an artist was getting harder and harder every year due to his declining eyesight. Monet's last large-scale series of works was Las Nymphéas. This was a series of huge canvases that were installed in the Orangerie in Paris. With this work, he could create a virtual panorama with his paintings.
You understand the kind of thing I'm talking about? Absolutely. Good.
In 1923, decided to go forward with cataract surgery. And this made some of the last canvases that he ever worked on really pop and explode with color as he hadn't done it in years. However, he soon became ill and was confined to bed. It was December the 6th, 1926, and as he was laying there he said out loud, "I'm thinking of preparing my palette and brushes to resume work." That day he received a shipment of lily bulbs from Japan and was making plans for his garden that coming spring. As he laid there, he was asked, "Are you suffering?" He quietly replied, "No," and continued to lay there in his home in Giverny, and at about noon, he would pass from the earth.
Now what do I know? I color for a living, but that, my friends, is how you do a video. Thanks for watching.
Hey, I guess they're right. Senior citizens, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, can still serve a purpose.